we have 3 speakers tonight. We will be done. We're going to go to the Forest concert. We will be done before the Forest concert starts. We'll get done in time for that. We have Laura Goodall will begin, Kayla Chandler goes second, and Mary Camertree will wrap us up at the end. So we'll get right to it. And Laura, you will welcome to go first. Laura Goodall.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out tonight and supporting the program. So, when you hear minimally invasive surgery, what do you think? You think of a good innovation in surgery technology that leaves less damage for people, and it sounds overall really good. But there are many considerations that must be taken when we're thinking about these surgeries and how we implement them in medicine today. So the field of surgery itself is an ever-evolving practice in which new procedures and technologies are constantly being created. This innovation improves the outcome for many patients, but there are many ethical dilemmas that must be taken into consideration. Surgeons and hospitals must weigh the benefits against the potential risks for these patients in order to fully protect their health, while also encouraging advancement. These decisions are rarely straightforward because what benefits one patient or procedure may carry unforeseen risks for another. Understanding both the historical context and the ethical frameworks surrounding surgical innovation is essential for responsible practice. A significant development in surgical history is the practice of minimally invasive surgery, also known as laparoscopic surgery. This has become a staple for many procedures in the last few decades. So, laparoscopic surgery is when small incisions are made and a long tube with a camera called a laparoscope is inserted, along with other surgical tools. This is much less invasive than open surgery, which is when a large incision is made to access the desired organ. Open surgery can be better for more complex surgeries that involve many organs and systems because you need a better vision to access all of these areas. But laparoscopy is good for many smaller surgeries. But it also is less tactile because instead of feeling with their hands, surgeons are using devices. Which is a big deviation from typical open surgery. Laparoscopic surgery often offers fewer scars and a quicker time of recovery. The rise of laparoscopic surgery reflects a broader trend in medicine towards improving patient outcomes while minimizing harm. But it raises ethical questions about when and by whom such procedures should be performed. Surgeons must consider when the appropriate training, if they have the appropriate training to safely perform the new technique. And these institutions must determine how to introduce innovations without exposing patients to unnecessary risk. Furthermore, the high cost of equipment and specialized training can limit accessibility, creating disparities in care. Because of these challenges, there are certain guidelines and ethical frameworks that should be followed when considering the implementation of new surgical techniques and technologies. Laparoscopic surgery began about over a century ago in 1901 when German surgeon Georg Kelling viewed the abdomen of a dog with an endoscope. He inflated the abdomen with air and inserted a cystoscope to visualize the cavity. And this technique was applied to humans 9 years later when Hans Christian Jacobius used the term laparothoracoscopy to describe the endoscopic observation of the thoracic and abdominal cavities in humans for the first time. In these early days of laparoscopy, the procedure was only used to visualize the cavity. People weren't actually being operated on, but it was good to see the cavities for the first time and understand them better. And it was used to diagnose people as well. Lighting was also inserted into these cavities to increase the visualization. The first laparoscopy in which operation was actually performed was an adhesiolysis done by Karl Fervers in 1933. After that, further developments were made, such as insufflation needle and the cold light source that provided better illumination while releasing less heat. Another critical development in laparoscopic surgery was the computer chip, which is a television camera that allowed us to look at the tube a lot better and to see the area clearly. The first laparoscopic appendectomy was performed in 1980 by gynecologist Kurt Zem, and soon after, laparoscopic surgery became widely accepted and sought after because of the smaller scars that would be left behind. Since people knew that laparoscopic surgery would offer shorter recovery times, smaller scars, they really started to want the surgery rather than the open procedure, its counterpart. So as the demand for laparoscopic surgery skyrocketed, many surgeons were faced with the need to learn this new technique in a very, very short period of time because they didn't want to lose patients to people who knew how to perform the laparoscopic version. However, there are many risks associated with learning a new and complicated technique so quickly. Are the patients receiving the surgery put at risk because they are being operated on by a freshly trained surgeon? And is the laparoscopic approach always the best approach, or is it just desired because of the minimal scarring and shorter recovery times? These questions are very important when considering the ethics behind new techniques. So the introduction of laparoscopic surgery has had a tremendous impact on the medical field because of the positive impacts it has on the lives of the patients who receive it. Because it's so minimally invasive and only a few small incisions are needed, there are smaller scars, less post-operative pain, and faster recovery times as well. And there are also potential cost benefits. Shorter hospital stays can also reduce expenses and allow hospitals to treat more patients with the same resources. These benefits increase the appeal of laparoscopic surgery for patients and doctors. But from an ethical standpoint, laparoscopic surgery also aligns with the medical principle of beneficence because surgeons are providing treatment that minimizes harm and improving recovery, which is beneficial to the patient. Also, technology has been increasing in recent years as well, with the high-definition cameras and robotic assistants, which have improved precision and visibility. While there are many obvious benefits to laparoscopic surgery, there are several downsides that we must take into consideration. One of the biggest concerns is the steep learning curve associated with the new technique. Surgeons who are new to laparoscopic procedures may face longer operating times and an increased risk of complications while they are gaining experience. This can compromise patient safety and raise other ethical concerns about how to balance the training of the new surgeons with the care of the patients, because ultimately, the care of the patients is what medicine is all about. It also raises the ethical question of whether patients receiving the open surgery while their surgeon is training to become a laparoscopic surgeon, if they are at a disadvantage because they are receiving that open procedure if the laparoscopic procedure is better. Additionally, during the laparoscopic training period, patients being operated on are at a higher risk for complications because of the inexperience of their surgeon. According to Gang, the Whipple procedure can take over 10 hours when being done at the beginning of one's training, and that the mortality rate is significantly higher. In some cases, minimally invasive approaches may even lead to worse outcomes than traditional open surgery. MD Anderson Hospital conducted a study about patients undergoing minimally invasive radical hysterectomies for cervical cancer. This study revealed that people that underwent the laparoscopic surgery had higher recurrence rates and lower survival rates than people who had open surgeries. This challenges the idea that less invasive surgery always means better. And it tells us that we need to be studying lots of surgeries and their long-term outcomes rather than just their initial benefits of short recovery times. Because we need to look at the long-term outcome for the lives of the patients. The implementation of laparoscopic surgery reflects broader guidelines that medical professionals must be constantly aware of in the ever-improving surgical field. Any new development in surgery, whether it's new technologies or new procedures, has to be implemented in a way that minimizes harm done to these patients. Brookman writes that there are 4 main categories for surgical innovation. They are oversight, informed consent, learning curve, and the vulnerable patient groups. So oversight is talking about when the new innovations need to be regulated and oversaw. It's meant to ensure that innovation occurs in a controlled, ethical manner that protects patients. One thing that happens during surgery, though, is that surgeons are often innovating on the spot to do what is best for the patient in that moment with different complications that can arise. So this can save the patient's life, but it might bypass certain review processes for new surgical innovations. So there is a delicate balance between making sure surgical guidelines are always being followed, but with also trusting the experience of the surgeon to know what they're doing is best for the patient. Another of the categories is informed consent. This is involving making sure patients are properly educated concerning the procedures that they are undergoing and that they are aware that their procedure is a new procedure. It's unethical to operate on a patient when performing surgery for the first time or if using a new technology if that patient is not aware and consenting to this fact. Any complications that could arise due to the novel nature of the procedure would be adding more risk to the patient in an already scary situation involving being operated on. However, there is the question of pre-operation anxiety, because some studies have shown that if people are more anxious before their surgery, that could increase the risk of complications. And if patients are aware of that their procedure is a newer procedure, that may cause even more anxiety. So it's all about making the patient comfortable without being deceitful to them, which is where we need to build trust between patients and the doctors. The next ethical topic is the learning curve associated with adapting new techniques. It's widely accepted that there must be some degree of training before attempting a new procedure. This training can include performing procedures on animals and cadavers, watching a surgeon who already knows the procedure, and being mentored by another surgeon. The final ethical category involves performing new procedures on vulnerable patients. If patients are unconscious, or it's an emergency, or there's a child with no parent present, it can be hard to gain consent for them to do this new procedure, but the doctor knows that it's the best procedure. So sometimes they have to obtain consent from the next of kin, or sometimes it was recommended to obtain from obtaining consent at all. So really, in cases of vulnerable patients, decisions must be made on a case-by-case basis, and trusting the surgeons who have undergone rigorous training for many years to trust them to know what is best for the patient. And while it is best to obtain consent directly from patients themselves, sometimes the experience of the surgeon must be trusted. A study done by Stefanis et al. Attempted to survey the opinion of the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons board members regarding what should be the necessary guidelines for new surgical innovation. They wanted to do this study because to limit many complications arose from new innovations being done in an uncooperative and undisciplined way. So the authors defined 4 categories of innovation: using a modified device, using a new device, doing a modified procedure, and performing a new procedure. From these guidelines, they created seven guidelines. The first guideline was that surgical societies should provide timely assessments of new technologies to help surgeons make informed decisions. Since some minor modifications only require basic familiarization, but some substantial innovations demand more structured training, supervision, and monitoring. So it really depends on the scale of the new technique and whether it's something drastic or simple. The second guideline is that surgeons should complete device or procedure-specific training to reduce the learning curve complications. So this is just ensuring that the surgeons are familiar with the tools they are using and the procedures they are performing before bringing them to a patient. The third is that institutions, societies, and industry all contribute to education, professional sciences, societies, and experience centers should take the lead, with the industry's involvement limiting to device-related training. Fourth is that surgeons introducing new procedures must already be fully qualified and able to manage potential complications. Since it's unknown the amount of complications that can arise in any given surgery, some surgeries go completely fine, others have life-threatening complications. It's important to have very experienced surgeons when using new techniques, so that they know how to handle these complications because of their years of experience. Fifth, surgeons should continually evaluate their own outcomes, and for major innovations, undergo external performance assessments. This is just doing more to regulate their progress with the new techniques, and to make sure that things are being done ethically. Sixth, oversight by institutional review boards and credentialing committees should ensure professionalism and patient protection. There are many ethical committees that exist when coming up with new innovative techniques and approving these techniques. So this guideline is just ensuring that new techniques are being oversaw. Finally, each new technique should be evaluated for safety, effectiveness, cost, and long-term benefit before and after its introduction. This is just monitoring the techniques to make sure that if we are using them, they do in fact work and are better than the already established procedure. Because we always want medicine to improve and not stay stagnant or decline. So, Laparoscopic surgery has revolutionized the field of medicine, showing how innovation can greatly improve patient outcomes through faster recovery times, smaller scars, and less pain. However, the rise of this technique also highlights the ethical challenges that come with adopting new surgical methods. Doctors are constantly wanting to improve their techniques and in medicine because they care for the patients and constantly strive to improve the patient's health. But there's also a degree to where they desire the fame that comes with coming up with new techniques. So doctors must balance this need for innovation and to create something new with protecting the patient's health. Because we don't want innovation to come at the expense of patient care. The guidelines created by organizations such as the SAGES emphasizes the need for proper training, oversight, and evaluation when new techniques are introduced. These standards help to protect patients while still allowing for growth and advancement within the field. As surgical technology continues to evolve, it is essential that these ethical principles remain a priority. True progress in medicine is not just about developing new tools and techniques, but rather about using them responsibly to provide the safest and most effective care possible. Doctors take an oath to do no harm. Whether in everyday practice or while revolutionizing the field, their duty is to provide the best possible care to every patient they serve. This calling reflects God's commandment to love and serve one another. Biblical principles such as compassion, justice, and love directly connect to every aspect of life, even something as clinical as surgical ethics. When doctors view their patients as individuals created by God, they are reminded that medicine is not only a science, but also an act of service, ensuring that every decision is guided by both fairness and care.
Thank you, Laura, very much. All right, we're going to take some questions from the panelists first, so we have time. We'll take a couple from the audience if possible. Gabe, why don't you start?
I wonder, do they take into account potential good of future patients when they're thinking about like cost-benefit analysis? Maybe there's higher risk for this patient, but in the future, this surgeon will be really, really good at this technique.
I assume so, yes. Because as a surgeon is improving, obviously that is the goal for them to improve and become very experienced in the new surgery. But we also can't neglect that each patient is an individual that needs to be receiving the top care that they can.
So you mentioned that higher costs are associated for surgery centers when they have to purchase the equipment that's necessary for laparoscopic surgeries. And I was just wondering if laparoscopic surgeries cost patients more money than open surgeries, if we assume that the patient didn't have any kind of insurance and had to pay out of pocket.
So I read that the surgery itself would cost more because of the technology and the expense that creates. But since laparoscopic surgeries have shorter hospital stays, the bill from the hospital itself could be less. So it really is probably different on a case-to-case basis.
Interesting question. Hallie?
You mentioned the program for training for laparoscopic surgeries. They do training on animals and cadavers. Is like the training program any different in that way from like open surgeries? Is it more difficult to become well trained for these laparoscopic procedures?
Yes. So I did read that laparoscopic surgery is more difficult in of itself, and that surgeons are typically trained in the open procedure first, and then they learn the laparoscopic procedure.
Do you think that surgeons should be required to disclose their personal level of experience with a new procedure as part of informed consent?
There's definitely some pros and cons to both because while it's obviously best to be honest with the patient, I did read that in those situations where there is someone less inexperienced, that they're also performing the surgery under the mentorship or guidance of an experienced surgeon, and that they would usually tell the patient that they would just be performing the surgery together.
And that's interesting. I presume that in some of your paper, getting back to Gabe's question, you got to learn somewhere, right? A surgeon has to start on somebody. Somebody has to be the first person a dentist pulls a tooth out of. Somebody has to be the first person who gets an IV from a nurse, and somebody has to be the first person that's a surgeon, has ever done laparoscopic surgery on. You have to do that. So I would presume a part of the training includes tethering a naive student with an experienced practitioner. That would be part of the ethical balance of that, I would presume, how that would go.
Yeah, and in those situations, I think if there are complications, the more experienced surgeon does ultimately take the fall for that because the newer surgeon is under their watch.
Sort of like a new professor, right? I mean, I will occasionally bump into my former students who are here my first, second year, and I will say, I am sorry. That was rough on you, so I apologize. But you got to try somewhere. You have some mentorship, but it's just a challenge. All right, Eric?
There's so much concern about who is doing these surgeries and about them having enough training in it. Do you see laparoscopic surgery becoming its own specialty?
I think it could. I didn't really look into that much, but a lot of general surgery procedures such as appendectomies, hysterectomies, things like that are like focused on a specific organ, it's much more common for those to be done laparoscopically.
Interesting possibility, isn't it? Yeah, maybe that's a niche for it. All right, Gabe, do you have another one?
I kind of think that kind of goes back to what you were just talking about. Which kind of surgeries, think about, there's such a huge difference of an orthopedic surgery on an ACL versus like heart surgery, brain surgery, the hysterectomy thing. Like which kind of things are most common to use them on? What has more risk, kind of thing?
Laparoscopic surgeries are mostly used in the abdominal cavity is what I read, and that's pretty much it, is what I read. I don't think there's many cases of them being performed in other areas.
Allison?
Well, you answered my second question through some others, but I was just wondering, have they used AI through any application in laparoscopic surgery?
I didn't read anything about that. I read some things about robotic surgery, which that could go along with AI perhaps. But yeah, I did not come across anything specifically mentioning AI.
We won't even need a surgeon soon, right? Just plug it in and let it go. Not really. I'm just kidding. Hallie?
Is there a way that hospitals can ensure equal access to laparoscopic surgeries for patients who may be low income or in rural areas?
I didn't read anything about that, but I think that would be good to have because if in some cases it's 100% proven that the laparoscopic procedure is the better procedure for a certain surgery, then it would be unfair to not offer that to certain people just because of where they come from and their economic background.
Always a challenge in medicine, right? Somebody's paying for it. Right? Somebody somewhere has to pay for it, so how does that play out? And that's a fundamental question about accessibility, right? That is pervasive, right, in healthcare. Todd?
It's kind of a follow-up to what I asked earlier, but also something that you kind of touched on of the anxiety that patients feel like going into surgeries and things like that. One thing I was curious of, if a surgeon was to be transparent about the level of like familiarity they have with the surgery, how do you think that would impact patient trust or choice? Or did you see patient trust in something in your research like that?
I didn't see much about it, but I was thinking about that as well because obviously we don't want to lie to patients because that's not fostering a good relationship, but also we want them to feel most comfortable with what the doctors are performing and we want them to feel confident in the skill of the doctor. So I think it's just a delicate balance between the two and building trust even prior to the operation, like in every aspect of your interaction with the patient, building trust in every spot you can helps.
Eric, you have one last one?
So you said the benefits of this type of surgery are quicker healing times and then less scarring. Do you know if less chance of infection is also a benefit?
Yes, I did read that. Yes.
There is less chance of infection?
Yes.
Okay. What's the answer to that? I have a question for you. Did you walk away from this paper with, if I asked, hey, what's one key conclusion or conviction or something you walked away from this paper, what would you say to that? What's the take home that you took home?
I would say that it's necessary to encourage innovation so that the field is constantly developing, but we don't want to innovate to the point that we're putting patients at risk. So we need to always be cautious of how we're implementing the innovation.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Sorry, any questions from the audience? Have time for one or two from the audience. Yes, Ashley.
So kind of tying back to Hallie's question about accessibility, did you read anything when you were doing your research about maybe this surgery being performed remotely using like robotics?
I came across a little bit about that, I didn't really look into it much, but I do think that technology is really crazy that we have that now, and that that's still being developed. And I think that could be beneficial to many people in many areas that might not have direct access to this care.
Yes, ma'am.
There is a relatively new way that they do heart surgery from the side. Is that a laparoscopic thing, or do you know? They don't
I do
open the
not know.
chest, they go from the side.
Quite possibly if they're making a small incision and inserting the laparoscope and with the camera, then it's
Sounds like it.
possible.
Sounds like
Sounds
it.
like it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It
which
does.
is laparoscopic adjacent.
Yeah. Laura, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Kayla?
Thank you all for coming out tonight and for supporting the program and the research that the three of us have done. It means a lot. They all are all here to support us. So what I was interested in researching this semester was how the concept of labeling theory ties into this thing called juvenile recidivism. And if you don't know what that means, the term juvenile recidivism simply refers to repeated criminal behavior by youth who have previously been convicted. In other words, that is, the rate of previously arrested kids getting rearrested. And this is a very prevalent issue in modern day America, with around 70 to 80% of kids being rearrested within the first 3 years of their release. So according to Rowan, a professor in criminology at the Simon Fraser University, while the justice system strives for fairness, studies have shown a very high correlation between labeling a youth as delinquent and high rates of juvenile recidivism. And so the act of formally labeling a convicted juvenile as a delinquent brings an overall negative societal reaction, and it reduces association with non-deviant peers, and thus it creates a harmful sense of self, and it alters the psychology of the kid being labeled. Formal processing, to understand this, we have to know how the court system even works with the child. And so formal processing within the juvenile justice system consists of several stages. So after a petition is filed against the kid, a juvenile is presented to a judge where simply they plead guilty or not guilty. And after this, a detention hearing takes place, which basically determines if they're allowed to go home until the actual trial or if they have to be placed in a detention facility, depending on how severe the crime they have committed. A pre-trial investigation is then conducted where risk assessments are made, which are trying to evaluate the likelihood of them reoffending in the future. Following this, hearings between legal teams take place to discuss the severity of the case, followed by another trial where the judge, instead of a jury, decides if the actual juvenile is guilty or not. And if they are guilty, that is when they are formally labeled as a delinquent. And so then a disposition trial takes place, which is meant to discuss the punishment that they receive, which can range from simple things like community service and counseling, all the way to being placed in a detention facility. And these detention facilities are very secure. They're not quite jail or a prison, but they're not quite home either. And so in 2019, around 1 in 4 of these cases ended up in a detention facility, which is a very high number. And even those who weren't placed in them for a very long time, for their probation, a lot of them have to go there on the weekend to be contained. And so formal labeling, though attempting to establish justice, it disrupts education for children and increases isolation, which results in repeated criminal behavior and thus recidivism for kids who are formally processed. And the idea of this formal process labeling comes from the labeling theory, which was developed a long time ago in 1963 by a sociologist called Howard Becker. And it provides an explanation of juvenile recidivism by showing how societal labels can morph the way we view ourselves and thus morph the way society views the way that you are being labeled. And so within this theory, there are 2 types of labeling, both formal and informal. Informal labeling happens when a deviant label is imposed by surrounding people, like parents or friends, people who don't have any government authority. And formal labeling is the same thing, except the deviant label is imposed by schools or courts, people who have that government-given authority. And Becker's argument was once an individual is labeled, society's treatment of them changes according to that label. And when that happens enough, the person who receives the word of the label that is given starts to internalize that and act accordingly. So within the juvenile court system, around 50% of these cases had an official labeling of delinquency in 2020. And this process is tied to a micro-sociological perspective that is called symbolic interactionism, which basically, to put simply, is how humans tie meaning to symbols and language. So the term label becomes a symbol because it's language. And if you're heard that enough and told that you're delinquent enough, you start to associate meaning to that, and thus meaning to who you are as a person. So society will begin to treat them based on their labels, and thus the individual will naturally internalize the given label and act within the expected behavior. So the cycle of labeling for the majority of these convicted juveniles begins not when they're labeled by the court, but it begins in their family backgrounds. So communication is essential, and we all know this, for a child growing up both physically and mentally. And Lynn Liu, in 2025, she's a professor in criminology, examined how limited communication is a predictor of recidivism for formerly convicted juveniles. And within her study, she looked at 5,784 convicted youths. And only 19 of them, which is 0.03%, so a very itty-bitty number, reported to have no adverse childhood experience. And these results suggest that juvenile deviance is tied to backgrounds in family trauma and unhealthy communication. The majority of juvenile cases also come from single-parent homes, with one study in 2019 in Pennsylvania showing that 70% of juvenile cases came from a single-parent household. So children in these environments experience extreme parental neglect throughout pivotal moments in their upbringing where they learn how to communicate and they learn what stability is. And so the study indicates that limited communication throughout reentry into the family contributes to recidivism. And once a child is convicted, getting reentered into the family where they already have a broken foundation, society also shows a pattern of rejection and withdrawal in multiple areas of life. So there's this data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth that show that juveniles who are incarcerated have a reduced possibility of employment and wage rate because, quote, full-time employment is associated with higher accumulation of human capital and stronger attachment to the labor market, end quote. So with the decrease in both economic opportunity and the decrease in an improvement in reputation, convicted children are left feeling very alone. And this leads to higher association with deviant peers because that's who they can relate to, and thus higher recidivism. And so children rely heavily on friendships for a sense of connection and identity throughout their growing up life. And Rowan found that labeled juvenile delinquents receive large societal rejection, and thus they withdraw from normative peers. And normative just means people who don't engage in deviant behavior. And so they increase homophily, which that is just a term that means they have a tendency to seek out others with similar labels as them. And so Rowan terms this as, quote, sympathetic others, which basically just means that they fulfill a need for commonality and understanding in a time where they are being very stigmatized. So while deviant peers have a high chance of supporting the labeled youth, they also reinforce criminal behavior. And that's what gets them rearrested within the first 3 years. So interestingly, I found this very fascinating. Rowan showed that stigmatization and rejection from non-deviant peers rather than delinquents commonly occur. So the rejection first happens with kids who don't engage in deviant behavior at all, and they tend to pull back first rather than the actual delinquents themselves. And he explains this by saying, quote, non-deviants may also perceive newly labeled peers to be threatening or to be avoided, and lead the labeled youth to both discontinue non-deviant ties and be rejected by non-deviant peers, end quote. So this exclusion escalates a feeling of alienation, which causes the labeled juvenile to receive connection from negative influences who have similar labels as them, because I need someone to relate to. So, Ascani examined this process in a study of 91 incarcerated juveniles who described their friends, and they used terms like gang members, stoners, loners, offers. And so children who learn social behavior from positive feedback. Thus, when peer rejection happens and they don't get that positive feedback anymore, the chance of positive reinforcement decreases stunningly. So associations with similar stigmatized peers encourage a deviant identity and how they recognize themselves, and pushes them into that cycle. And so the core of this issue is how formal labeling alters a youth's psychology, thus leading to recidivism, and morphs the way they view themselves, and that's the way society views them. Throughout the process of peer and societal rejection, labeled juveniles begin to internalize the label, leading to higher rates. Ascani described this as developing, quote, an offender stigma as a master status. And a master status is simply a sociological term, which means that it is a social position that overpowers all the ones in your identity. So when you get the label of delinquent, if you're told that enough, it becomes a master status, which means it's the first thing you think about yourself and the first thing you attribute to when people ask you who you are. So when the label is placed upon the juvenile, that becomes a dominant part of their self-perception. And as their identity becomes knit to delinquency, labeled juveniles experience strong feelings of hopelessness which can result in their behavior. And much of the juvenile justice punishment is ego-based, which focuses on blame rather than restoration, which is correct. We want to know if the juvenile is guilty or not guilty. But it lacks how to shape the person to fit back into society. And although unintentional, the system treats children as an issue to be dealt with rather than a person to be shaped. And labeled youth begin to adapt their expected behavior of their label, fulfilling the deviance that Becker explained in his theory. Formally processed juveniles begin to stigmatize themselves, and they may give up applying to jobs due to expectation of refusal, as a study was done on that in 2022. Internalization of deviant labels transforms the psychology of juveniles, and in turn the way that they live the rest of their life. So labeling juveniles as delinquents establishes a harmful cycle that perpetuates overall negative societal reactions and takes them away from positive influences and helps produce an undermined sense of self. And the majority of these formally processed juveniles already come from broken homes that haven't taught them healthy affection or stable communication. And so as a result, the delinquent title given to formally processed juveniles leaves no room for growth and little opportunity for the rehabilitation of their inner psychology, because no one is teaching them how to love and how to healthily communicate and how to do other things than deviant behavior. So when formally processed, juveniles are extremely isolated, with fewer opportunities for employment and association with normative peers. And so when looking at this perspective, as a Christian, I think it is entirely spiritual, because it has to do with the way that we deal with children who have committed wrong, which is the way that Jesus deals with us all the time when we commit wrong. Proverbs 1:4 says, "A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks its spirit." Labeling a juvenile as delinquent can very well break their spirit and stunt psychological and spiritual growth. The words that we have extreme power to build up and to break down, and it does not take very much to do that. The studies presented show how powerful a single label can influence a juvenile's identity. Justice is extremely important to the law enforcement system, yet restoration is needed to begin improvement. Convicted children require reshaping the way they look at their behaviors, looking at the things they do, rather than the person that they are, and telling them that they are wrong to be in society and wrong to exist. Romans 5:8 reminds us that while we were and are sinners, Christ died for us. Children who enter the court system are often from underclass parts of life, and this verse encapsulates the goal of rehabilitation, which is that redemption is possible even for those who society has given up on. We cannot let ourselves turn a blind eye to juveniles who are receiving false labels and thus distorting their view of themselves and viewing them only as their mistakes. This helps them to set up into a cyclical pattern of criminal behavior. Reducing recidivism rates means viewing the child as more than their criminal behavior. And I think all of us as Christians believe that the word changes people, turning the vilest offender into a person who is saved by the grace of God. And love covers not only a multitude of sins, but it also covers a multitude of hurts. And so opportunity for healing must be given for formally processed youth, beginning with being recognized not simply as deviants, but as a person who needs direction in God's word.
Thank you very much. All right, Eric, we will start on your end of the row this time.
So how much of what you talk about is strictly for juvenile recidivism, and how much of it is applicable to adults even?
I'm sure a lot of it is applicable to adults. I studied specifically, all the research I got was on juveniles, but I'm sure a lot of the adults who are in prison were convicted as juveniles, so I'm sure it can tie into that as well. I think it just ties into the concept of people and how labeling affects everyone. I don't know if that's a great answer to your question.
Todd?
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe you could expand on it some more. How do you think peer relationships play a role between social stigma and recidivism amongst labeled juveniles?
I think it plays a huge role, because who we associate with kind of becomes who we are. I mean, that's seen all throughout life and all throughout the Bible, all throughout anybody's life. So I think trying to integrate kids into healthy environments very young is a great way to try to reduce that chance of getting into that behavior.
I guess what I'm curious of too is to get onto that is like, you have a child that goes away and spends time maybe in a juvenile detention center and then gets reintroduced back in the public education system. How do you think there's a way, or have you heard of ways that are good ways to introduce them back into a social setting, and specifically so that their peers can take care of them and they can be reintroduced.
Yeah,
back
that's a
into
really
spaces.
good question. I didn't look super into that. There is a therapy called cognitive behavior therapy, which tries to break the patterns that they think about themselves and that they might think the world thinks about them. The difficult part is once you do that, you go back into society and maybe some people only see you as that label, trying to balance like that societal reaction based off truth. So I can't give you a full answer to that, but that's something I want to look into.
Thanks. Allie?
How do you think that this change can be implemented within the court system and within schools, since that's where they incentivize this label the most within themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question officially, but I think it's a lot more of identifying the behavior itself as bad rather than the person. The behavior itself as harmful to society rather than you are a person who's harmful to society. I think even like simple rephrasing of words can alter that. But again, I don't have all the answers for that.
Awesome.
How does the child's relationship with their parents change as a result of labeling?
That's a good question. I looked into that a little bit. I couldn't find a ton. A lot of them are already extremely isolated and don't see their parents. A lot of them in the single parent homes, the mom is gone most of the time. So from what I see, the child just raises themselves, which is what brings them back into the cycle.
What was it, something like 99% of that study, you said there's 5,000 something, whatever,
Mhm.
like 19
Mhm.
reported no major childhood issues or something, or family issues or trauma or something like that, right? Which gets back to the core of all childhood, is the home, right? And as society allows homes to break down, you are going to see juvenile behavior breakdown. It's what the home was supposed to do, is to train that. And without that, you just don't have that. So that's the heart of the issue ultimately, right?
I wonder why do the consequences that we place on juveniles seem to, at least like 70–80% of the time, not lead to a change? And what kind of consequences, or should consequences even be a part of the thing versus like cognitive behavioral therapy, counseling type things? Like why is there not a correlation of consequences that we expect to lead to different results? Why is it not?
That's a really good question. From the research I've done just on this paper, I think a lot of it is trying to, again, just like figure out if they did it or not. And so, therefore, if they did do it, you do have to have some sort of justice for it if they have committed something violent against somebody else. And in order to fulfill that need. However, it is shown that detention facilities really are they're not jail, but they're definitely not rehabilitating at all. So I think those kind of punishments can be pretty damaging. I do think that counseling or seeing how the child maybe needs more protection would be an alternate route. And a lot of them do take that too, but it's a difficult thing to balance of trying to fulfill, recognizing this as a person who needs to be put in society and also trying to achieve justice for the person who has just been harmed. So.
Eric, do you have another one?
My question is basically that, how do you approach finding that balance between we want to ensure justice, but also we want to, not encourage this recidivism, we want to encourage rehabilitation?
Yeah, I think especially for children, if you're going to place them in something like a detention facility, then provide someone to help them get back into society well and to understand why their behaviors are bad, like I said, rather than their own person. Because almost if you go into a detention facility and you're not taught how to get back into the re-entering of life, you're almost kind of guaranteeing that they come back. So some sort of balance between having someone besides, non-deviant peers to feel like that they see them as a person.
Todd?
As you're going across this research, how did you see the role of your faith or play into this, and specifically also like what applications could we go for, like religious practices we could do to help people that are labeled in this way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's what Jesus does for us all the time. I mean, we commit, you know, in a sense, sins. We commit crimes against God, all the time. It's why we need him. And so I think a lot of that, it reflected, who am I, you know, who am I to hold myself higher than somebody who maybe is labeled as delinquent, and kind of help them see that too. It's like, yes, you have committed something that is wrong, and like, let's not put a softener on that, but you yourself still have a chance for grace and rehabilitation.
And that is the language of the gospel, isn't it? Right? You are here's a label for you, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people. I mean, that's a message that has tremendous potency to it. If someone understands that, you know, you are the workmanship of Christ, Ephesians 2:10. I mean, I am the product of Christ's work. I mean, what does that mean if I really grab a hold of that, you know, and I really absorb that? I mean, that's transformative, right? So this idea that Kayla's elaborated here on, that labels lead to identity, I think is how you put it, something like that. I mean, that can be a very positive thing, right? Getting back to your sort of question, how do you do this spiritually? Because again, that's the root of it, isn't it? Because we're spiritual people. So, great question. Hallie?
Is there a way for juvenile courts to more effectively engage families, specifically single-parent households, into supporting healthier communication during reentry?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the family, because a lot of these kids, I think, based on the research, come from parents and homes who you have to be willing to want to put in the work in order for it to be changed. So if the kids already come from places where they're not being taught love, or some of them are even being labeled very young as bad kids, that can be really difficult to try and convince a parent who isn't as necessarily involved to all of a sudden become involved. So I think it depends on the family.
Yeah, sometimes it can be difficult to convince a parent that it's not a kid problem, it's a family problem, right? And you can all work together to solve it, but you're all together in the mess too. So yeah, that's another great perspective. Allison.
This may be beyond the scope of your research, but I was just wondering if you came across any other country or culture that has a legal justice system that's different than ours and labels people in such a way that it's not harmful for them.
I did not, but that's a really interesting thing to look into. So I'm sorry I can't answer that question, but
That's a great question, though. Right, that's a great question. Is there, who's doing it better? Great.
I wonder about the cognitive behavioral therapy and the counseling. Is there, I don't know, I can imagine a kid goes into that, like, okay, now I'm a problem to be fixed. These people are trying to fix me. How do you balance that kind of mindset? Or even, I don't know. I think this comes back to kind of the consequence thing. How do we help kids want to change, have a desire to change? Because I think that's where the consequences come from. Hey, this is what happens. How do we help them to have a desire to change? And then, like, use that desire afterwards better.
That's a good question. And again, it's very difficult because they're dealing with people who are different across everywhere. Like, no one kid is going to be the same. So one might be a lot more receptive to it than another. I would say, for the best of my ability, just approaching it with a very genuine love, and you want to help them. Not so much as like, let's get this done as soon as possible, like you're here because your parents are here. It's like, why are you actually here? Like, I'm here to help you, not because you are a problem, but because I'm trying to set you up for a better life. I don't know if that would work. I'm not a counselor by any means, but I think that would be a lot better than just simply dropping them into that.
Great. Time for a couple of questions from the audience. Anybody has one? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am. You first.
Did you come across Rutgers, Proctor's Spiral of Futility from Rutgers University?
I did not.
Yeah. Well, he describes, he's talking about black kids in education. Robert DeGuerin, in his book, Before You Can Discipline, applies it to the classroom. And it has to do with where a child feels rejected. And people may not even know they feel rejected. It starts with rejection, and then it comes down toward isolation, insularity, being insulated from everybody. And the very worst you go to is being a criminal. And he goes into how to break this up, break these steps up. And
Interesting.
I just find it very powerful in this book, Robert de Bruin's Before You Can Discipline.
Great.
Thank
I'll
you.
have to give it a read.
Emma.
I'm wondering if in your research you came across any, like, in specifically young children, like before they kind of get to that age where they're like committing these crimes, if there were any behaviors that like maybe teachers could look out for, or if it was more like just the home and their parent situation that was more of an indicator.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, actually. A lot of these kids were pretty isolated in the beginning, and I think even in school, they'd be pretty isolated and separate from normative peers. And some might think that is shy, but really it's a feeling of I don't belong here, or kids don't want to accept me, or I don't, like, not even knowing what to feel because they've never been taught how to deal with all of these crazy emotions coming on at once. So that was definitely a pattern of repeated isolation before they're even convicted in the first place. So that's the main one I noticed.
Great. All right, Kayla, thank you very much. We had a medical talk with laparoscopic surgery, had more of a societal talk, and maybe a little bit of a merging of the two of this next. Medical with a little bit of societal implications to it. So Meredith, thank you.
Good evening. Thank y'all for being here tonight. Tonight I am presenting my research on placentophagy, which is the practice of ingesting the placenta postpartum. While I recognize that this topic seems irrelevant to many and may even be uncomfortable to some, it is an important topic that many people have questions about. Many women hear about this practice and are genuinely curious and excited about a possible way to improve their postpartum experience. As they seek out more information, it is easy to find positive and encouraging testimonials on social media or credible-looking women's health sites. Many women, especially those who are interested in natural remedies and birth practices, are swayed by this type of information. I decided to study placentophagy due to the conflicting discourse that surrounds it. My goal was to get down to the molecular level, understanding what empirical research exists about placentophagy and its effects. While this task can be tedious, I do believe this type of rigorous study is necessary to fully understand the practice. After a brief consideration of the important roles of the placenta, we will discuss the claims made about placentophagy and the current research that exists regarding these claims. Popular claims about the beneficial effects of placentophagy are not supported by evidence on its nutritional content, hormonal effects, or measured outcomes. Placentophagy has become more popular in recent years as the functions of the placenta have become better understood. The placenta is necessary for a successful pregnancy because of its service to both the mother and the fetus. The placenta adapts the mother's body to pregnancy and primes the immune system to tolerate the foreign object. It also facilitates the transport of nutrients, blood, hormones, and waste between the mother and the fetus. Another reason that some women seek out placentophagy is the existence of the practice in nature and a personal desire to pursue natural health practices. Placentophagy is a common practice in almost all classes of non-human placental mammals. Historical evidence of human placentophagy exists in traditional Chinese medicine, but it has only become popular in the West since the 1900s. Today, 1/3 of American mothers who give birth in non-hospital settings ingest the placenta in some form after birth. Mothers who have participated offer anecdotal evidence describing faster recovery, increased energy, and improved mood. However, very little clinical research has been done to confirm that these perceived benefits exist. Controlled experiments and double-blind clinical studies about placentophagy are relatively rare, but those that do exist are beginning to offer a foundational understanding of placental components and their potential benefits. The first of these components that we will be considering is the nutritional value of the placenta. It is undoubtedly true that the placenta is rich in both macro and micronutrients that may be beneficial to a new mother. What is not definitive, however, is how available these nutrients are after processing. While some eat the placenta raw or cooked whole, the most common method of placentophagy involves steaming, dehydrating, and pulverizing the tissue before encapsulating it into pills. These processing steps not only make placentophagy more palatable, but are necessary to reduce the content of microbes that could be potentially infectious. The placenta contains a natural diversity of microflora that are common in the skin and reproductive tract. These microbes have an important role for the mother's health, but they do have the potential to become pathogenic and must be reduced to prevent infection. This concern was studied in a controlled experiment that compared the microbes in raw placental tissue versus after steaming, dehydration, or a combination of the two. Raw tissue contains some pathogenic species, but each of these were greatly reduced or eliminated completely after steaming and dehydration. After both steps were taken, the microbial content in placenta powder fell below the threshold for food safety. This finding emphasized the importance of proper processing steps for the safety of placentophagy. While high heat processing is necessary to prevent infection, it may simultaneously reduce the efficacy of placentophagy. High heat exposure greatly affects the placental nutrients that postpartum mothers may benefit from. Placental tissue contains nutrients such as protein, vitamins, and trace chemicals that are commonly sought out postpartum. While these nutrients do not all respond in the same way to heat, they are each affected. Raw placenta contains 48 grams of protein on average, but after processing and encapsulation, each capsule contains only 2.4 grams of protein. For most women with access to a diverse, nutritious diet, this is an insignificant amount of protein that can easily be found in other sources. Trace elements that mothers may be seeking to supplement postpartum, such as calcium, magnesium, and potassium, are also found in raw placenta tissue. Other potentially nutritious components include amino acids, B vitamins, and vitamin A. The concentration of trace chemicals was not drastically reduced by processing. The concentration of iron and selenium actually increased due to accumulation after dehydration and steaming. Trace elements are present in placenta pills. Trace elements that are present in placental pills are in concentrations that are non-toxic, but are most likely not nutritionally significant. The placenta is specifically rich in iron, which is commonly supplemented in the postpartum period. The iron content in placental pills is only 24% of the daily recommended amount, and women who take the pills do not show an increase in their iron levels. Placenta pills are not an effective treatment for low iron, and iron deficiency may develop if this is the only iron source postpartum. Based on this information regarding the reduction of nutritional content after processing, it can be assumed that women with access to proper nutrition should seek these elements from their diet rather than supplementing with placenta pills due to the insignificance of its nutritional benefit. The other major component of the placenta that women are seeking to benefit from is its hormone content. The most cited reason for eating the placenta is to reduce postpartum depression and improve mood. In the largest survey of placentophagic mothers, 73% of participants, all from community birth settings, reported that improved mood was their primary motivation. The placenta plays a vital role in hormone synthesis during pregnancy, and hormone levels drastically decline immediately following the delivery of the baby in the placenta. The sudden withdrawal of these hormones is thought to contribute to postpartum depression. The ingestion of these hormones through placentophagy is proposed as a way to rebalance hormones and regulate emotions. Placentophagy is a seemingly simple solution to combat the hormonal changes during the postpartum period. The deciding factor, however, is whether or not the hormones in the placenta are retained in a way that will be beneficial in rebalancing maternal hormone levels. Controlled research has concluded that hormones are only present in small amounts after placental processing. Only estradiol, progesterone, and allopregnanolone reach a concentration that could be potentially effective in raising maternal hormone levels. The steaming step has been shown to cause the largest reduction in hormone concentration, even up to 99% in some cases. Findings such as these are only the first step in determining how hormones are affected by placentophagy. Future work is required to establish how maternal hormone levels may change after placentophagy. One concern here is that hormones that are retained in the placenta capsules undergo even further processing by the digestive system. Digested hormones may be degraded in the gastrointestinal tract, which would render them ineffective, and the desired hormone rebalancing would not occur. Our final consideration is on the large-scale studies that have measured the outcomes of placentophagy for both mothers and their children. Research on a molecular level has shown minimal benefits associated with placental consumption. Studies on the macro level have identified associated risks and have failed to prove that placentophagic mothers receive health benefits from this practice. Some of the risks have been described previously, such as microbial infection and bioaccumulation of trace chemicals. These microscopic risks have been identified in real cases of negative placentophagy experiences. A case in Oregon in 2016 describes a newborn who developed a group B streptococcus infection after their mother consumed contaminated placenta capsules. Newborns may also experience adverse effects due to exposure to hormones that are retained after processing, even if these are in small quantities. A 3-month-old infant in 2018 began to experience mild puberty, which was reversed when the mother stopped taking placenta capsules. Cases such as these are rare in the overall population of those who participate in placentophagy. Most participants experience no adverse effects, and risks do seem to be minimal. In a study of 23,000 medical records, no links could be made between placentophagy and an increase in hospitalization rates of postpartum mothers or their infants. While harmful outcomes are only experienced by a small subset of placentophagic mothers or their children, they are still important to consider as proven outcomes of placentophagy. Records-based studies of placentophagic mothers lead to conclusions that perceived benefits are not experienced in many cases. In a study of over 6,000 mothers who have participated in placentophagy, matched participants who consumed their placenta experienced postpartum depression more often than those who did not consume their placenta. This study was transparent about the difficulties in gathering this data and removing confounding variables, and emphasized that the relationship is unlikely to be causal. However, this data does offer evidence that placentophagy does not lower the risk of postpartum depression in any way. While the current research does not affirm hormonal benefits as an outcome of placentophagy, some women may be reporting benefits due to placebo effect. In some cases, the placebo effect is considered therapeutically valuable if it benefits the woman or her baby. Women who receive the perceived benefits purely as an outcome of placebo may feel better and be better suited to care for their newborn. The Center for Disease Control and similar health organizations in other countries advise against placentophagy due to the associated risks and the lack of safety regulations. Due to the possibility of clinically significant harm with little clinical benefit, physicians should advise against placentophagy. Mothers should receive clear counseling from their physicians on the research that leads them to discourage the practice. Mothers who are seeking perceived benefits should be provided with alternatives to achieve similar outcomes, such as proper nutrition, dietary supplements, and emotional support. The claims made about the benefits of placentophagy sway vulnerable mothers seeking to make the best decisions for her and for her baby. These claims are not supported by the current evidence on nutritional content, hormonal effects, or the measured outcomes of placentophagy. Many women who have participated in the practice may have beautiful and positive stories to share about their experience. However, they mislead mothers by claiming hormonal and nutritional benefits that exist only by anecdote and by minimizing associated risks. The readily accessible information coming from non-traditional birth sources and social media does not explain the full picture of placentophagy. As interest in placentophagy continues to grow, education from credible sources must be more readily available. Women who understand their options and are trusted with full information from their physicians are empowered to make informed decisions about their own postpartum health. Increased interest in placentophagy stems from a desire to provide children with the best care in infancy and to support their success later on. God has designed the female body to do this work beautifully, both during pregnancy and in the postpartum period. The love of a mother and the desire to provide for her children reflect the very love that God has for us. As mothers are choosing how to care for their children, they may trust in God's care and provision for them, seeking His glory in each decision that they make.
I bet some of you are surprised to hear about that tonight. Like, what is this? That's great.
How long have they been around?
Placentas? A long time.
Placenta pills.
Yeah, placenta pills, I don't know. We'll answer that question here maybe as we go through. Just so you know, I get this question in my human anatomy class. This is not just, she didn't just grab this out of some sort of odd thing. I've gotten this multiple times when we talk about reproductive system anatomy. So it has increased in popularity. So here we are. All right, let's start with some questions. Gabe, you go first.
I think about the difference of the 48 grams of protein you said versus the 2.4. So my question, I guess, is that do you look at studies that looked at the other methods of it? Because it does seem like there's pretty minimal effects of the pill form, but like eating it whole. Was there any studies about that found different benefits?
Most of the studies are about encapsulation, just because that's the main route that people take. I guess this is important to start with here too. Research on this is really difficult because a lot of women who participate are not, they're doing it at home, they're giving birth at home and then doing all of this at home. So research is pretty difficult, and especially I think it's easiest to find research on encapsulation because that requires that extra level of a service, or like for some women who give birth in a hospital, they ask for their placenta to be released, and so then you're aware that they're doing it and can maybe follow up with them on it. But for, I would say especially eating it whole or in a more raw form is done by a very specific subset of women who probably are not as willing to participate in clinical research about it. So I didn't find a lot of studies that talked about how ingesting it whole affects you. Most of the ones that talked about the placenta in its raw form, that was just like the basis of the future studies that talked about encapsulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great. Allison?
So what caused the popularization of this practice in the West?
So I was reading a lot about that, and I think that some of it is just like a more, like this kind of cultural shift in certain areas towards more natural medicine, which has a lot of factors. Some of it is distrust of medical professionals, or kind of just the desire to have them to be in control, of your own health. And so I think that shift has led to more people seeking this out. And I think also, as we understand it more, as we understand how it's important for the baby, while that also leads to more questions about if it's actually effective, it does lead people to think, if this is what is giving my baby life in the womb, then surely it has things that my baby needs, and so by me ingesting it after the fact, I'm benefiting my baby and my own body in some way, just as we understand more about it.
That's an interesting question, isn't it? And I think part of the answer may also be that Western culture as a whole has shifted more distant from a Judeo-Christian background, which is where Western culture has been the major influence of Western culture in the last centuries, the Judeo-Christian background. So if you look at I won't comment too much on this now, maybe before we close I will, but the placenta is not mentioned very often in the Bible, but even the placenta is mentioned one time in the Bible. We'll talk about that maybe in a second. And it's not in a favorable light. So if there's anything the Bible teaches, that happens in a context that is not a good context. So if you have a strong Judeo-Christian foundation of the culture, that idea is part of that culture. And the farther we move away from that, the less important that influence becomes. That may be part of it as well. Hallie?
I know your paper was only around human placentophagy, but I was wondering if you found any studies about animals ingesting the placenta, if it's beneficial. I'm assuming they just do it because it's nutritious for them or anything like that.
Yeah, I actually did read a lot about that. There are multiple benefits that animals experience that they're not really sure humans are able to experience, but most placental mammals do eat their placenta. There's a few classes that don't, but it seems to kind of be the norm is for them to just instinctively do it. Even herbivores sometimes consume their placenta, which is really interesting. And some of that might be because of predation, like the leaving placental remains tells predators that there's a vulnerable little baby somewhere. So some of that's for safety, but also some of it is for nutrition, and also it's been shown to play a role for some animals in maternal bonding. I read one study that, I think it was rats, but I'm not completely positive about that. Rats that did not eat their placenta were less bonded to their children and sometimes rejected care of them. So that's another again, these are the kinds of things that women hear about and think, well, this must be beneficial for me too, but we're just not sure.
Todd?
I think my question's kind of already been answered, but given the lack of proven benefits, what is the motivation for the continued popularity of this practice among new mothers?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, that the main motivating factor is usually hormonal, trying to combat postpartum depression. And I think the question is less, the problem is most women don't know that it's not beneficial, or they don't know the science behind it. They only hear anecdotes, and so they trust them, and they want to pursue it as well because they hear all these women saying that it's helped them with their postpartum depression. But if you get down to the molecular level, it doesn't seem like that's actually going to be possible.
Eric?
So if there's really not any benefit to it, are there any good alternatives on what a woman could do with her placenta?
With her placenta?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting question. I mean, the baseline of what happens is it's medical waste, and hospital handles it. There are a lot of things that women do with their placenta. Not sure if I'm going to get into all of them, but it's really important to some people because it does give life to your baby, and so for some people, they want to honor that in different ways. But I would say the main thing that is done with it, and probably the best thing that should be done with it, is to let the hospital handle it.
Gabe, you have another question?
So can't any of these nutrients or hormones be supplemented just completely in different ways? And especially like thinking about, especially like versus the capsule, even looking at just a raw placenta, think about what nutrients are in that. Can't that just be, why would we eat the placenta when I can take a bunch of,
Yep.
I don't know,
Great question.
supplements that will do the same thing?
Yeah. Again, it goes back to what your motivation is, and just kind of your general approach to medicine, I think, and to your own health choices. But if a woman who is fully trusting of medical research is interested in getting the benefits, perceived benefits from the placenta, there are plenty of other nutritional sources. I was reading some about hormone therapies that are offered for postpartum depression, and even those are in pretty preliminary stages right now, of like hormone supplements. So that is something that, I mean, just in general, postpartum depression is something we don't have great treatments for right now. So maybe that is one that we would say there's not as good of treatments for, but generally, yes, all of these things can easily be found in other sources. So it's just about your motivation.
So at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that mothers anecdotally said that they experienced faster recovery, increased energy, and improved mood. Do you have any idea what they were basing this comparison on? Like, was it a previous pregnancy where they did not ingest the placenta, or is it just anecdotal evidence from mothers who did not ingest the placenta? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sure it's some of both. I actually talked to a woman who did not, she consumed her placenta once, and then the second time did not. And this is exactly what she told me. Like, I've read this in an article, but also she said very similar things of, with her second, she felt more tired, she felt more irritable, all these things. But it's virtually impossible to know if those things are due to placenta, or if they're due to any other factors in your life, or nutrition, or anything else. So, yeah, and that's the problem with anecdotal evidence, is there's no baseline for it, and so you can say what your experience is, and that's a valid experience, but it's hard to affirm that will be true for anyone else.
Yeah. Hallie?
Are there any, excuse me, safer evidence-based postpartum practices that mothers who may feel they have an emotional or physical need to eat the placenta, that they can partake of those instead?
Yeah, that's so, like I was mentioning with Gabe, that the hormone therapies especially are pretty new, and they are offered to some, I think, but the risks especially are still being determined, so they're not given out as often right now. But definitely nutrition is something that I'm really interested in, of how nutritional changes could help in the postpartum period, and then also just social support. Women who are already vulnerable for postpartum depression, just establishing that and establishing good clinical guidelines of being aware of their risk and kind of catching it early can be helpful to offer them the support that they need.
Thank you. I know there's a chorus concert to get to, so let me open up to the audience. I know there's a couple people, I've seen hands move a little bit. Before we close, yes, sir.
I just wondered, is the research that you looked at primarily focused on home deliveries or with midwives as opposed to in a hospital with a doctor?
Yes, sir. It's most common in more home birth settings or like midwife care, things like that.
Yeah.
So most of the research, the controlled experiments that I looked at, I think could have been women from any type of birth setting, but a lot of those records-based studies were mostly in home birth or non-traditional birth settings more than hospital settings.
Could I have a follow-up? Did they then, I mean, they did something with that mama's placenta, not somebody else's. It was their own placenta they were using, right?
Yes, sir.
And then did they make it into powders themselves?
So some women do it themselves. There are services.
The processes they can teach you to do or something?
Yes, sir. It's actually very simple. It's really
Okay,
not,
have you done it?
yeah.
For somebody else?
Yes, the technology is not complicated. It's stuff that you have right in your kitchen. So
Well,
some women do it all by themselves, and some will hire someone to do it for them. But yeah, it's not a complicated process.
Yeah, there's a market there. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, right? Sort of touch a couple of things that have come up tonight. Clearly, if we consume human tissue for nutrition, that presents an ethical question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consume human tissue of any kind for nutritional value or whatever other value, right?
And that's blood.
It can be blood unless they powder all them. But that's right. That's a biblical question. How much blood is in and all that. It's also a matter, well, mammals do this and we're a mammal. Therefore, you better be really careful about that. Yeah, we are mammals, but we're much more than that. Biologically, we're mammals, but we're much more than that. And mammals do a lot of things that we want to be careful doing.
Yeah.
And some of that's spoken of in Scripture. Just this weekend, I was up in Indiana with a cousin and her husband. They had pigs, and he went out. He was telling the story. They had little piglets there, and he said, "We had this many. Now we have this many. There was one little scrawny, sick one, and it died. It came back the next morning, and it was gone. It wasn't in the pen. The mom ate it. Right? That's pig cannibalism. Well, you find that in human societies, in the worst kind of scenarios. And Deuteronomy 28 speaks to that. It speaks of the blessings and the curses. You all know this passage, perhaps, right? And then one of the curses is it's going to become so bad, and you will be so bad as a people, that a mother will eat her own child, and she will eat her own placenta. And so it's put in a context of the worst kind of scenario, right? The only time it's mentioned in Scripture is a culture that has lost all of its civilized kind of behavior. They've gone so debased, they'll even eat the placenta along with the baby. And she'll actually do that and hide it from her family. That's how Deuteronomy 28 presents that. So it's not only a catastrophe militarily, it's a catastrophe morally within the culture, which he predicted was going to be their cause. So that's the concept. The only biblical context for this subject that we have is pretty strong. Right? That's a pretty strong context. So it's an interesting biological question, but of course it takes us to a tier as Christians of a spiritual question of what does it mean to ingest human tissue for some kind of reason. So, thank you all very much, Meredith. Oh, sorry, one more question. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I like that the fact that the research shows that it's not really beneficial.
It's interesting. That's what it is, right?
I do, and then it's kind of like alcohol. People used to think it had medicinal qualities to it, but it doesn't. They're showing now that there's no benefit.
Right.
So it's kind of
Meredith, thank you very much. thank you very much for showing up, for